Hello, this is Mark Barnes of Logos4Training.com. This video is designed to introduce you to the new features of Logos 5. It assumes that you're familiar with Logos 4 and all you want to know is what's new. Well, in this video I'm going to show you 20 things that are either new or changed in Logos 5. Now, the great thing about Logos 5 is that on the surface it actually looks very similar to Logos 4, and that's great because you don't have to relearn very much. All the skills and the investment that you've put into Logos 4 you keep with Logos 5. All your books, of course, and all your existing resources from Logos 4, they'll get transferred into Logos 5 as well. You won't lose any of those. Be aware though that Logos 5 does require Vista or above on the Mac Snow Leopard or above. And remember too that it will install on top of and replace Logos 4. You can't run them side by side. Now, the features that I'm showing you in this video do require a certain level of base package, and depending on what package you have will depend on which features you see. You need gold or above for everything that's new. Now, particularly what's new in this update are some databases. There are actually 10 new datasets in Logos 5. They're the Bible Word Senses database, the Bible Events database, a clause database, a phrase database, a preaching themes database, a referent database, a reported speech database, a root database, thematic outlines database, and a universal timeline database. And those 10 datasets give you a whole range of new tools and new uses in Logos 5, and that's what I'm going to show you today. So what we're going to do in this video is simply work our way along the menu bar here, and each time there's a new feature or something that's changed, I'll show you what that is. So here on the home page you can see immediately that the bar that used to be along the top of the screen has now moved to the left hand side. Gives you a little bit more real estate on wide screens, but other than that everything is pretty much as it was. On the library tab there is a new filter here at the top which is surprisingly useful. You can see here we can now show individual collections within our library. So if I just want to show this collection I've created on Greco-Roman background, there I can see those resources. It's a very small feature but actually very useful. There's a couple of new columns that have been added to the library as well. If I scroll across you'll see the community tags column is new, and these are tags that have been used by other users. So if you're someone who doesn't tag your library very often but wants the benefits of tags, maybe that column will be useful for you. If you can't see it, remember if you right click on the headings here you'll be able to choose that column. The rating column has also changed. You'll notice that there is one rating here in blue. That's a community rating. Any resources in your library that you have not yet rated, that is they have a rating of no stars, then Logos will bring in the community rating for that particular resource. So the yellow ones are resources that I've rated, the blue ones are other users' ratings. Now if I open up the information panel you'll see that the user tags come in here, and if you hover over them you can see how many people have tagged them. Again, back on the ratings, again if I hover over you'll see how many people have rated that particular resource and a more precise rating for it. Feature number 3 is visual filters. There are 2 new visual filters in Logos 5. There are speaker labels in Bibles. Now if I open up a Bible, let's say my ESV here, and here I am in Matthew 9, you'll see that there are these little megaphone icons at the beginning of various speech marks, and if I hover over that icon you can see that that indicates to me who's speaking at this particular point. Jesus here, in this case the scribes. Go to this one, it's Jesus again. You'll see there's a little description just in case we don't know who he is. Again, if we come down here we can see these speaker labels. Now if you want to turn those speaker labels on or off, we do that from the visual filters menu as before. The other visual filter is for timeline events. Now timeline events is going to come up when we look at the tools menu later on. and it shows up particularly in dictionaries. So let me load up my ISBE, International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, and here I am open to the article on Uzziah, and you can see that in various places we have these little flags, and those are timeline events. So you can see that every time a date is mentioned in this particular resource, there's a flag next to it. And there are two types of flags. There are flags that have a filled-in image, and there are flags that have just an outline image. And as I hover over them, you'll see that it clarifies the date that we're talking about, and if I click on those particular flags, it will bring up the timeline to the place that I've clicked on. Now again, we'll be looking at that timeline later on, but let me just quickly explain to you the difference between the outline flags and the filled-in flags. It's very simple. The outline flags indicate a date, and they'll take you to that date in the timeline, but the filled-in tags represent an actual event that is noted in the timeline. You can see in this case the reign of Jeroboam II in Israel, and if I click on that particular entry, you'll see that I get the indicator that flashed up here, as you often do when you change a resource, that takes you to that exact spot. And indeed, if I click on this particular event, you'll see that it lists the ISBE as a place where I can go to find out more information about that. Again, you can turn those indicators on or off from the visual filter menu. Let's close these windows and look at feature number 4, and this time we're on the search menu. Let me switch over to a basic search, and you'll see immediately there are search helps which are new in Logos 5, and if you often forget search syntax, I'm sure you'll find that very useful. It's worth scrolling down and having a look, and there are 47, you can see here, different examples of filters, of searches rather, and we can filter the searches and find specific ones. So if we imagine, well, how do we find two words that are near one another? I can just type in near here, and you'll see that it shows me those search helps that mention the word near in them. And if there's a particular one that we like and we want to use, all we have to do is click on it. You'll see that it comes up here in the search box, and we can just click the arrow to run that particular search. Now if I go back to the search help, I do that by deleting the existing search string, clearing the filter, and scroll right the way down to the list. You'll see that there's several examples down at the bottom of searching images with tags. Now that tag field is new in Logos 5, and it's a terrific field if you want to find particular types of images. So do have a look at those search helps, and you'll find that very useful. So if we want to search just for line drawings, very easy to do now. You weren't able to do that in Logos 4. You can see lots and lots of line drawings are listed for there. Now the Bible search has got some updates as well. You'll see that also has search helps, and what's new here is sympathetic highlighting in search results. So if I search all passages in the ESV for love, let's say, I'll do a verses search, and that gives me the option to add versions. Now that option was available in L4. If I just choose the let's choose the New King James, and you'll see now that in the additional version the searches are also highlighted. That didn't used to be the case in Logos 4. I can add in multiple versions as well, so let's say the Hebrew Old Testament, Lexicon Hebrew Bible. Let's add that in as a second version. Whoops, I've lost my New King James, put it back. New King James version, Lexicon Hebrew Bible. And you see again I get the highlights in the Hebrew Bible as well. So that's a very useful addition to the Bible search. Now Morph Search has an addition as well, and in Morph Search what we're able to do now is search not just for lemmas but also for roots. This is a new feature. You can see it mentioned here in the search help. So let's click on that. I need to change my section back to all passages and make sure that I'm using a Greek Bible. Let's say the ESV. Switch the morphology to Greek, and off we go. So again, you can see that it's searching with a particular root. If I add in the NA28 instead of the Hebrew Bible, which is not much use in this context, you'll see that regardless of the actual lemma that's being used, this is searching on roots. That's a very powerful feature that again we'll see in some of the later databases as well. I click on the NA28 and then right click. You'll see that the root data has been added to the right click menu, and we're able to do a search by that root should we want to. Again, we can come here and you'll see that root information is again displayed. Those roots are also available to us in analysis view by the addition of an extra column there. So again, if you don't see the column, you can add it by right clicking here and see that root is now an option. If I scroll across, you'll be able to see it. Here is the root. You can see that the root is common even when the lemmas are different for verbs and nouns. The other column that you may have noticed has been added is a highlight column. If you're somebody who highlights your Bible very often, you've now able to see in the analysis view which results are found in particular highlights. Now, I don't actually use highlighting very often, but in my ESV I did add some random highlights to 1 Corinthians 14, so I could show you this feature. So it looks very colourful. Let's just change this passage to 1 Corinthians 14 and change the root to something that will appear there. Let's say pneuma. Now I'm going to run that analysis search, and in the highlighting column I'm going to drag that up here and collapse all those results, and you can see that in this section I've got 15 results with no highlighting, 1 in the blue highlighting, 2 in the orange, and so on. Those of you who use highlighting, particularly if you use inductive markup, you might find that a very useful new feature. Now, feature number 5 that I want to show you is a new type of search altogether, and that's the clause search. So let's look that up here. Again, you get help to explain to you how to use this feature, and it's worth reading that through to make sure that you understand it. Essentially what the clause search does is combine data from Bible facts, from morphology and so on, and it gives you new ways of searching. It's easier than syntax search if you've wrestled with that in Logos 4, and indeed is using different information from that. So let's give you an example. Let's imagine we're interested in all the places where Moses said something. So to do that we would type in subject : Moses, and then we're interested in a verb, and let's say Lego, the verb to say. Now this is New Testament. Moses did speak in the New Testament, at least he was reported in doing so, and it gives us a smaller set of results which is easier to see, which is why I've got the New Testament selected and I'm using a Greek lemma rather than Hebrew. So if I run that search, you'll see that it gives me 5 results of Moses speaking. So there's an obvious one here in Romans 10 verse 9 where you can see that Moses spoke directly his speech. That's an easy one to see, but you can see again here in Romans 15 and verse 10, here's a quote from the Old Testament. It simply says, "It is said," and here is the speech. Now if I hover over the cross-reference, it will take me back to Deuteronomy 32:34, and if I scroll up and I keep scrolling and I keep scrolling and I keep scrolling and I keep scrolling right back to the beginning of this section, we find that it was indeed Moses who spoke the words of that song, and therefore it was indeed Moses who said, "Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people." So I think that gives you some idea of the work that's gone into these databases. This is not some kind of automated tagging that some programmer has run. The guys who have done this tagging are people who are familiar with the biblical language and the biblical text. Many of them have advanced degrees, some of them even doctorates, and this is tagging that's been done very carefully and done manually by hand over a long period of time. And it gives you opportunity then to find things that maybe you wouldn't find otherwise. You probably would have missed this result if you'd have been looking for the things that Moses was reported to have said. A similar example is here in Hebrews 9 verse 20. If we look up the cross-reference for that and go back to Exodus 24, you'll see again it's Moses who spoke those words. Now, one thing that you do need to note when you're running the clause search, you'll notice I don't have an AND command in here, and that's because it's not required. In fact, if I was to put it in, it would create an error. But one of the nice things about the clause search is that it does help you as you're going along, because there's only a limited number of fields that you can use. Logos finds it much easier to guess what you're trying to do. So as I begin to type, you'll see that it immediately suggests to me what fields I can use. And as I click subject and begin typing, let's say Moses, it gives me the example of the subjects that I'm able to use. And you can see the little icons here tell me whether they're biblical people, and that's the little person icon, biblical things, or biblical places, which are noted by these two icons here. There's a female biblical person, and there are groups of biblical people that have this icon here. So that helps you to do that. And when you're typing in lemmas, for example, you get the prompting. You can see that I've made a mistake there. I've missed the be of verb, and immediately I've got the red box around it. The text has gone red. That's Logos' way of alerting to me there's a mistake there, and I need to go back and correct it. As I type in my lemma, immediately now I can type transliteration as you saw me before, typing in Lego. Logos knows to provide me with Greek results because I have a Greek text selected. If I was to change that to the Hebrew Bible and re-enter my search, you'll see that Logos is now suggesting Hebrew lemmas instead. So the clause search is very powerful, and that was my fifth new feature in Logos 5. So let's move away from searching. I'll close these windows down, and let's this time look at the Documents menu. You can see immediately it's got a new look. We've got these nice bold icons here on the left hand side, and here on the right hand side the documents are ordered in these three columns. Now, as in other places, you can right click here and turn these columns on or off. Now by default the list will look something like that, which is more similar to what you saw in Logos 4 rather, but you've got the new type column, and personally I immediately sort my documents by type, because when I'm looking for a document I find it easier to remember its type rather than necessarily remember what I called it. So when I sort by type, you'll see I get this much simpler list, and I can just go quickly to my clippings. Now Logos remembers how we've got our list sorted and which of these are open, so if I close that particular menu and then go back to it, I'm back to exactly how I was. You'll notice, however, that within clippings these are not in alphabetical order, and probably if you're like me you'll want them in alphabetical order. Thankfully Logos allows us to sort not just by one column but by two in this particular view, and to do that we hold down the Shift key and click the second column, in this case name, and as we do that the primary sort on type will remain, but we'll get a secondary sort on name, and there you can see it now in alphabetical order. Again, Logos will remember that next time I go into the menu, and that's how I keep this menu now in Logos 5. You may also have noticed that Logos 5 provides two links that weren't there in Logos 4. You can see them down here at the bottom of the Documents menu, and as you can see they allow you to either share documents or undelete documents. Now undelete documents is fairly straightforward. If I click on that link you'll see that it opens up my browser, and assuming you're logged into logos.com, it will take you to the right place where you're able to undelete those documents. So you can see here these are documents that I've deleted recently. Let's just use one example. So here I was reading a reading plan. When I'd finished reading that particular resource, I deleted the plan. And if I flick back to Logos, you'll see that currently in my reading plan I have 2 results. Those are there. It doesn't include the pierced by the word, so let's undelete that. Just click this button. You can see it's been successfully undeleted. Let's go back to Logos, back to the Documents menu. It won't show up just yet. It's still got 2 plans. I have to wait for it to sync. Logos syncs every couple of minutes or so, so that would happen normally pretty quickly. But just to speed things up, I'll hit the sync item up here. Once that sync has finished, I'll now be able to see that reading plan in my list. So you can see now I have 3 results, including pierced by the word. The other link here was to share documents, which is a very powerful option. This links in with Faith Life groups, so you can create groups of people in Faith Life, and within those groups you're then able to share Logos documents with other users. So here are all my documents that I have in Logos, or at least the ones that are supported for sharing. You can see that some are to be added soon. And if I want to share a document, all I do is go to the Actions menu here, and you'll see that for reading plans I can either collaborate that document so that other people are able to view the reading plan. They can make changes as well if they want. I can duplicate it or delete it. Some documents add a 4th option as well. So for notes, for example, you can see that there's also a publish option, which allows groups to get a copy of that document. The difference between publish and collaborate is that in collaboration, if somebody edits a document, everybody else also sees those changes. Whereas with publish, if I make edits to somebody else's documents, those edits are private to me. The person who originally shared the document will still see the original version. You can also duplicate and delete documents, which is self-explanatory. Do choose to publish a document, you'll see that it brings up a list of my Faith Life groups and asks me who it is that I want to share that document with. It's a very simple process and works very well, and particularly for those of you who maybe already have a Faith Life group within your church, or maybe you'd like to share notes within a small group, or clippings documents, whatever it might be, maybe in class, in seminary. That's a really useful new feature in Logos 5. Let's go back into Logos and back to that Documents menu, because you'll probably have noticed that there is a new document type here called Bibliography, and as you can see from the help text, that allows you to edit and annotate and print lists of resources. So let's go ahead and create a new Bibliography document. It's obviously blank at the moment. I can change the heading as normal with documents by clicking the pencil, and I can add resources into this bibliography from various places, from another bibliography, from a clippings document collection, whatever it may be. So those are the options. I won't show them all to you. I'll just show you a clippings document, for example. Here's a clippings document I've been working on recently, and the 11 citations from that clippings document are now listed here. They're in the order they appear in the clippings document, but I can click sort if I wish, and now they're in alphabetical order according to the editor or the author. I can change the style, let's say to SBL or any of the other preset styles. I could also add from a collection. So my list of collections comes up. Let's say I want one on background. So I can click that, and all of the resources from that collection also get added in. You can see I now have 163. If I want to save that bibliography as a new collection, I'm able to do that. I just click on the menu here, the resource menu, and choose Save as a Collection, and you'll see almost immediately it comes up, and all of those resources are now listed here. So the bibliography document type is a 7th new feature of Logos 5. The 8th feature is something new that's been added to passage lists. Let's close these windows down and go back to the Documents menu, and I'm going to open up an existing passage list. Let's say the passage list on Heavenly Dwelling. And this looks very familiar, but you'll notice here in the corner is an option to memorize. If I click that, it allows me to change my Bible version if I want. If you want to learn Greek or Hebrew, you can change that to a Greek or Hebrew text if you want. Let's say the New Lexicon Hebrew Bible. There it is. So you could practice your Hebrew or your Greek, obviously, if you're in the New Testament. I think I'll switch back to English for the purposes of the demo. And I'm looking at Daniel 7:18, which is this verse highlighted in bold here. I've got a bit of context either side. Maybe that will help you to remember it. And at the moment I'm practicing, and I'm going to hide hold words in random order. You'll see what that means when I click Start Practice down here. Now I have to confess I've got a fairly useless memory, and you're about to see a demonstration of my bad memory as much as a Logos feature, but I'm going to do my best. I should have written the verse down, shouldn't I? Let's try. Now I can overtype the words that are already there in grey if I want. That might help me to remember it, or I can press Tab or Space to skip those words to the blank ones. So let's type the Saints of the Most High. I'm just clicking Tab here. Forever. I'm afraid I can't remember that one. I'll click Tab, it will appear. That was obvious, wasn't it? And ever. And when I tab out of here, you'll see down the bottom is step 1 of 6. So step 2, there'll be more words missing, as you can see, and so on. So you go through, by the time you've got to step 6, all the words are missing. When you're done, you can exit practice, and if you want, you can quiz yourself. Now when I quiz myself, it won't necessarily quiz me on Daniel 7:18, because remember the quiz is for all of the verses in the passage list. And there were many more verses than that. But when I hit Start Quiz, it will choose one of the verses from the passage list, and then I will be expected to write down that verse. You can see there's 21 of them. I'm afraid I've got no idea at all what Romans 9:23 is, but you can imagine how that would work. So that concludes feature number 8, scripture memorization, and it includes everything that's new that we can access from the Documents menu. Now I said I was going to work across through the menu, so I ought to take you to Guides next, but actually lots of the useful things in Guides use data from tools that you access from the Tools menu. So it will actually be easier for me to show you the tools first and then go back to Guides at the end. Now here in this left hand column, the library tools, nothing has changed. All of those tools work in exactly the same way as they did in Logos 4, but there is a new feature slightly hidden away that I want to show you, and I can get to that new feature in several ways, but probably easiest through the read-in list. So read-in list is unchanged, but what Logos allows you to do now in Logos 5 is preview resources that you don't own. And it's obviously quite difficult to find resources that I don't own. They're not in the library. But here in read-in lists that have been created by other Logos users, we get little padlock icons next to resources that we don't own. So let's say I was looking through this list and came across some books here at the end that I don't yet own and would like to find out a bit more about them. But all I need to do is click here. It will attempt to open up the resource. As you can see, you're familiar with this message from Logos 4, but here now in Logos 5 we get a preview, a few pages from the beginning that will give us maybe a table of contents and that kind of thing. You can see that here, and maybe a few pages from later on where we can get a feel for what that book is like. That's a really useful feature. No doubt will generate a few more book sales for Logos as well, because if we click up here, just the same as in version 4.6, it will take us to logos.com and we can see how much that resource would cost, and obviously if we wish we're able to purchase that resource as well. Going back to Logos and back to the Tools menu, you'll see that the biblical people, places and things that used to sit here in the middle have been replaced by one tool which includes people, places and things, but also events now, and that tool's been renamed to Bible Facts. So that's the 10th new feature that I want to show you. Let's just close down these windows first though. Now we can go back to the Tools menu and I'll show you Bible Facts. Now in the center column you'll see that biblical places, people and things have now been rolled together into one tool called Bible Facts, and you'll also see that Bible Events has been added into that tool as well. That's new. Events were not part of Logos 4. So let's open up that tool, and here you can see that we have a not terribly interesting Bible fact come out. This is the messenger from John the Baptist. But let me show you an event, because that is new in Logos 5. Let's say crossing the Red Sea. That was a quite important event, and you can see now that just as I've begun to type, various suggestions have been made, and the second one here is the event. We know it's an event because of this flag, is the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. So let me choose that particular event. You'll see here on the right hand side we get a timeline, so we can see how that fits in to Bible history, is the particular event that we're looking at, and you can see that that follows that event, what comes before that event, where exactly it all fits in the whole history of the Bible. Here on the left hand side is a column that gives us a little description of the event and the main place where it occurs, other places in the Bible that it's mentioned, the biblical people that participated in this event, biblical things that are related to the event. Let's look at one of those biblical people, let's say Moses. Now much of this data is similar to what we had in Logos 4, particularly this right hand panel, but you'll notice there's a section here called Role. This is new in Logos 5, and all of the biblical people have been given various roles. Someone as important as Moses has multiple roles. Many other people will perhaps just only have one role. Now at the moment all we can do is look at that data, but hopefully in future versions of Logos we might be able to search by that data as well. If we scroll further down, you'll see the dictionaries section that will be familiar from Logos 4, the relative section as well. But here's another new section, referred to as. This is a very interesting section, and again, somebody's gone through all of the Bible, New and Old Testament, and looked at every time that Moses is mentioned. And very often he's mentioned using his name. In fact, 845 times he's mentioned in that way. But many times he's mentioned just with a pronoun, he or they. 661 occasions. Imagine someone's had to go through every time the he or they or she is mentioned in the Bible and have tagged it to help us to know who that refers to. Now that might not be terribly interesting necessarily, but maybe what's more interesting is to notice that on 17 occasions Moses is referred to by this title, the servant of the Lord, and particularly in the opening chapters of Joshua. We can click the little ellipsis here to see where else that title is used. Now if you're doing a study of Moses, particularly maybe of the way that Moses handed over to Joshua, that could be very useful information for you. In fact, if we run the Bible facts on Jesus, you'll see that section becomes even more interesting. So let's scroll down to that section now. You'll see that Jesus is very often referred to just as he, or as the implied subject of a verb, obviously his name, Jesus. And then we can see the various usages of different titles that Jesus was given: Lord, Christ, Son, Jesus Christ. We can see their relative popularities. We can look and see whether different authors preferred different titles or not. You can see that the title Lord Jesus Christ, for example, seems very prominent in both Acts and Romans. Teacher seems very prominent in the Gospels, but isn't used outside. You can see how this data could be very interesting for if you wanted to do a study on the titles of Jesus. You can see he's called Lamb 28 times in the book of Revelation. So again, very interesting data that's new in Logos 5 in the Bible Facts tool. The other thing that's new in Bible Facts in biblical people is that the data now includes anonymous people. In Logos 4, you had to have a name in the Bible to get an entry in Bible Facts, but now crowds of people, nameless people, they're all mentioned here. If you want to see some of them, we could just type in crowd, for example, and you'll see that there are dozens of crowds that are now listed here as well. Now, biblical places and biblical things are very similar to Bible Facts. So if I brought up rod, for example, as a biblical thing, you'll see again this is all very familiar from Logos 4, but we get this section referred to again. You can see the different words that are used. If I choose a place, let's say Bethel, we again get the referred to section, and that will alert us to the fact that Bethel has other names, Nahash and Luz, and we can see it's referred to in other ways as well. So that's Bible Facts. That was new feature number 10. New feature number 11 is also on the Tools menu, and this time it's the Bible Sense Lexicon. Now, I think the Bible Sense Lexicon probably wins the prize for the least promising display, leading to the most useful tool, because this is an incredibly powerful tool that's required an awful lot of work, but I'll freely admit it doesn't look very spectacular here on the screen. This data actually becomes much more useful in other places that we'll see a little bit later. But let me just quickly show you how that tool works. Essentially what happens is that various words are used in the Bible in different senses. So let's say the word brother, for example. If I type that in up here, helps if I can spell. You can see that brother is used in a variety of ways. It can mean a fellow countryman. It can mean a fellow believer. It can mean a companion. And it can mean, of course, as the description so accurately says, a male with the same parents as somebody else. And again, what somebody has done, or a team of people have done, is they've gone through every noun in the Old and New Testament and tagged it so that we know the exact sense in which that noun is used. So if you want to separate out the times when brother is used to mean countryman, as opposed to when brother is used to mean believer, as opposed to when brother is used to mean the person with the same parents as you, you can do it in Logos 5. So here's the data for what we might think of the ordinary meaning for brother. We can see that these are the Greek and Hebrew words that are used for this particular sense, and there's the distribution of those usages across the Bible. Again, this is not for any use of the word brother, but this graph is specifically when the word brother means a male with the same parents as someone else. Here on the right we can see how this word has been categorized. We can look at narrower meanings of brother, so foster brother would be an example of a narrower meaning. It's used just once in the Bible, in the book of Acts. Or we can say that kinsman is a wider meaning, and as we click on that you see that gives us various other narrower meanings. A wider meaning than kinsman again is relative, and so we get other examples of relatives that we could choose. So you can see we can go up and down the tree using this right hand panel. If I go back to kinsman and choose brother, and then click on the Greek word adelphos over here, you can see that that's going to open up a Bible word study to adelphos. So that's a quick way of getting to the Bible word study. The Bible Sense Lexicon data is also stored in the Bibles themselves. So let me close that and quickly open up a Bible. Let me go to Acts 1 and verse 12. Again, I can't spell. And if you look at the interlinear panel down here at the bottom, you'll see that there's a row here for sense. If that doesn't show for you, just right click in this area and you'll be able to add it here. Now as we look at Acts chapter 1, you'll see that brother is used in different ways. So if we click on the word brother here, you'll see that that's referring to Jesus' brothers, and clearly that's the primary sense of brothers that share same parents, and you can see down here in sense that's listed for us. But when I look in verse 16 at the word brothers, or indeed verse 15, you'll notice that the sense there is used quite differently. So brothers here, Peter means his disciples. He's not talking about his physical brothers. So if I click there and then look down in the reverse interlinear, you'll see that that sense is showing up and Logos knows that brother in verse 15 means something quite different from brother in verse 14. Now again, I can click on that and go straight to the Bible Sense lexicon if I wish. So that's new feature number 11, the Bible Sense lexicon. New feature number 12 is the timeline. Now we saw this briefly before when we looked at timeline events, those little flags you remember in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, and you can see it's a very detailed timeline. I'm currently looking at 792 to 752 BC. I can zoom in and out using these arrows to widen or to narrow the dates as I want. I can change the style in much the same way as I could the Bible Fax tool. If you want something very bright, for example, you've got the vibrant style. I think I'll stick with the default. If you want to move around, all you need to do is click and drag, and you're able to move around. You'll notice there's a scroll bar here that indicates that actually we're only seeing a small part of the timeline. If I scroll down, you'll see that there are many events that are listed here in the timeline. In fact, if we look at the filter, we'll find there are 8,089 of them. And they cover things that are mentioned in the Bible, but also various things that are happening around and about. If you just want to show the biblical events and not the other ones, you click on the biblical section here, and of course you need to go to a time in the Bible when things are actually happening. So to do that, we can click on this fit menu here, and you'll see that brings up various eras for us, and that allows us to change the dates quite quickly. You'll see that many are listed, both historical eras and eras from the Bible. I went to the time of the United Kingdom when David was on the throne. You can see that all those events, biblical events, are now listed for me. If I want to go back to all the events, I just click up here. Now if all I'm interested in is events that mention David, I can use the filter to filter out other events. So I could just type in David here, and you'll see that all the other events disappear, and I'm left with 48 events on different places that mention David. Now you can see there's an example here of that sometimes in the Old Testament in particular, it's difficult to get the chronology exactly right, and there might be some slight disagreement as to exactly when a particular event happened or other. And you can see that there are two suggestions, an early and a late suggestion for when David was on the throne. You might be interested to know, well, where do these two different ideas come from? And for any event on the timeline, we can just click on that event and we get more information. If I click the More tab, you'll see there's more again. And what this does is it lists all the dictionaries that I own that mention this particular date. And I can click on any one of them, and I'll be taken to that dictionary, not just to any old article, but actually to the exact place where that particular date is mentioned. I can click back on the flag to go back to the timeline. So again, I click on event, and you can see that here in the ISBE it mentions this Phoenician linear writing. Let's click on that event. It opens the ISBE, and you can see that's exactly what it does. It's describing to us at this exact spot this new writing style. So that's the timeline tool. Let's close all of those panels down. Go back to the tools menu. We've looked at these three things here. So new feature number 13 is a couple of additions to the settings menu. You may have noticed as we've been looking at resources that Logos has a new font. If I just reopen a resource for you to see, you'll see it's a little bit squarer than the Logos 4 font. Now if for some reason you don't like that font, you are able to change back. You'll see that there's been a new option, default brackets Logos 4. So that's what it's used to look like, and this is the Logos 5 version. But you've also got a text display section here in program settings, which is new, and we've got the options to justify resource text on or off depending on your preference, and you can make a little minor tweak to the line spacing as well. You can make it slightly tighter or slightly looser. I'll leave it at the default. New feature number 14 is some improvements to the information panel. Now this is, you'd easily miss this, but this is a great little feature, I think. Let's go back to the Bible. I'm in Acts chapter 1, and let's go back to that word brothers that we were looking at here in verse 16 and open the information panel. Now here you can see that there are two new sections that have been added to the information panel, and this top one here is, I think, the most interesting, because what that is doing is it's looking at all of the reverse interlinears in my library, and it's showing me how this word adelphos is translated. So you can see that the ESV, the old NIV and the NLT translate that as brothers, quite a literal translation. The New King James, the King James and the LEB translated as men. The new NIV, with of course its use of inclusive language when possible, translates it as brother and sisters, and the New Revised Standard translates it as friends. So we're not just looking about how that word is translated generally in those Bibles, we're looking at how that word is translated in Acts chapter 1 verse 16 in this exact spot in all those different versions. It's hidden away in the information panel, but it's actually quite interesting to find that out. Underneath that you've also got another little section here. Now this is using the referent data set. Do you remember in the Bible Facts tool we saw how, let's say, Moses was referred to as servant of the Lord? Well, here what this is telling us is that the disciples, they're the people who follow Jesus and listen to his teachings, are referred to as brothers, which of course we knew from our earlier study. So the referred to data also shows in the information panel. Now this referred to data is quite clever. So for example, if I click on this man down here, you'll see again that Logos immediately knows that this man refers to Judas Iscariot. And you can see again from the translation data that some of the less literal translations have actually inserted the word Judas in there to help us understand who that is. So that's improvement number 14, the information panel, and that concludes our look at the tools menu. Everything else works exactly the same as it does in Logos 4, and that enables us now to go to the guides menu. Now we can see that the guides menu in just the same way as the documents menu has these new columns, and we're able to sort by columns. And in the guides menu I normally personally sort by type as a primary sort, and then shift click as a secondary sort, not name this time but reference. And what that does is sort for Bible word studies in alphabetical order, showing English, Greek, then Hebrew. But for things like passage guides, for example, it's now sorting in canonical order. Now if you're like me, when you first open this menu in Logos 5, you'll be surprised by the maybe the Bible word studies and the passage guides that show up that maybe you never knew you'd ever saved. Logos 4 you could save passage guides and so on, but they were very difficult to find again afterwards. And to be perfectly honest, I gave up saving them quite early on because I could never find them, and I ended up just creating them from scratch each time. But now they're here in this guides menu, they're much easier to find, and you might find yourself saving those guides much more regularly than you used to. If I run a passage guide, there's a new section in the passage guide. This is new feature number 16. Let's run it for those verses in Acts 2 that are highlighted, and you can see that the new section is this one here, outlines. Now what that does is it takes me to places in my library where the book of Acts has been outlined, so I can see where Acts 2, 1 to 13 fits in the grand scheme of Acts. Now this only works for resources that have been especially tagged with outlines, and you can see that New American Commentaries, some Bible dictionaries have been tagged in that way. So if I click here, it will open that commentary to the outline of Acts, and I can see where Acts 2:13 fits in the grand scheme. The Bible dictionaries, as you might appreciate, tend to give a much simpler outline. Maybe that will be more helpful, and again I can see that outline there. So that's a new feature in the passage guide. So that was new feature number 16. New feature number 17 is on Exegetical guide. Now there's two things that are new in the Exegetical guide.
Let's run it again for Acts 2. Let's just do verse 1, keep it simple. And it's the word by word section that we're interested in here. There are two new things that have been added. The first you can see here for nouns, the sense has been added, so you can see that the sense of day here is assigned to a particular purpose or observance, the day of Pentecost. And obviously I can click here to bring up the Bible Sense Lexicon and explore further if I want to. That's one new addition to the Exegetical guide. The other addition is here next to the parts of speech, and this is the syntactic force. Now this data is coming from the Lexicon Syntactic Greek New Testament, and that's now included. You see the little glossary definition that comes up from there as well. Now, feature number 18 then is the Bible word study. Now we've got quite a lot new in the Bible word study. It's probably the most exciting of the three existing studies. Some great updates here. Let's run one on pater. Now this again is familiar to you from Logos 4. If I scroll down though, you'll see there's a new root section here. Isn't that wonderful? So you can see that pater comes from the root pater, which is shown for us here. But also listed are all of the other words in the Greek New Testament that come from that same root. We get little spark graphs over here on the right. Click on those spark graphs to bring up a little graph of the results of that if we want. Or we can click on the lemmas here to open a Bible word study to those new words if we want. If we scroll down even further, we can see that there's a new senses section. Now this is taking the data, as you might appreciate, from the Bible Sense Lexicon, and what that's doing for us here is it's now listing all of the senses which the Greek word pater is used. So you can see the what we might think of the ordinary name for father. That sense is used 837 occasions across Old and New Testaments. A fellow Israelite, an ancestor, parents more generally, father as an example, and so on. So all those are listed. Again, I can click here to bring up the Bible Sense Lexicon, or I can click there to open the Bible word study. And not much use when I'm already studying the word, but more use when different words are suggested. If I scroll further down, you'll see there's a third section that comes up down the bottom, phrases where pater is used. Now the other little addition to the Bible word study is up here right at the top, and that allows you now to restrict a Bible word study to a certain portion of the Bible. So if I'm interested in how the word father or pater is used, let's say just in Acts and not in the rest of the New Testament, I can now get that data. So you can see it's used 35 times now in the book of Acts, and here is the root data. You can see that root data has changed and now just shows me the root data for the book of Acts. Now some of the sections still show data for the whole Bible. It's fairly obvious when they do that, but you do have to just be aware of that. But those additions to the Bible word study, particularly the root section, to a lesser extent the phrases section, the senses section is also incredibly useful. This restrictor passage filter here is actually very useful as well. Just on their own, those changes to the Bible word study are a real advantage in Logos 5 and probably represents one of my favourite changes. But let's close these panels. That was new feature number 18 in the Bible word study. New feature number 19 now. We're nearly at the end. A new guide on the guides menu called the Sermon Starter Guide. You can see it listed here. Let's create a new guide. Now you can use the Sermon Starter in two ways. You can either enter a passage or a topic. Let's enter a passage first of all. I'm going to enter Acts chapter 2. As I type that in, you can see various suggestions are made. You can see that the suggestion of Acts 2 itself, but also various topics here that are referred to in Acts 2 or are related to Acts 2, those are also suggested. I'm going to choose this option here, Acts 2, 1 to 13. That fires up the Sermon Starter Guide. Now, most of these sections are actually familiar from the passage guide. It's quite similar to the passage guide in some ways, but as the name suggests, the idea of this is to get you kick-started when you're preparing a sermon or a Bible study. Now, this top section here, theme, is new, and you can see that what that's doing is it's listing themes which Logos thinks you might be interested in if you're interested in Acts 2, 1-13. So you might be interested in the Holy Spirit, or the gift of tongues, for example, or gifts of the Spirit, or miracles. And I can click on any of those themes, and as you can see, it will open up a sermon starter guide to that theme. And I'll show you how that works once we've looked through this particular sermon starter guide. Further down, you can see that there's a thematic outlines section. So let's imagine I'm preaching on Acts 2, 1-13, and as I'm doing that, I think, well, it would be an ideal time to preach a sermon on the gift of tongues. And I can click down here in my thematic outlines, and you can see that I have a synopsis of this particular theme, and it runs through the whole of the Bible, gives me these various topics and ways, and you can imagine how useful that might be for preparing a sermon or some kind of study on the gift of tongues. Now, in this particular section of thematic outlines, you can see over here we've got a little copy section. So I can click copy here, and that will go to Microsoft Word, and it pastes it in the current document in Microsoft Word. So you have to be careful you've got the document that you want open. But let me bring up the Word document that's gone into. You can see here it is, and that's all been copied through into Word. But perhaps even more useful is the ability to copy that into a passage list. This is a really nice little feature. Just change it to passage list and hit copy, and you'll see that Logos will create a passage list called the gift of tongues. All the information here is copied over. You can see some nice headings created, and there you have your lovely passage list that you can do what you want with. You can memorize it, you can use it in searches, and so on. So that's a really nice little feature in thematic outlines. Now, if I keep going down my sermon starter guide, you'll see that the normal sections that you're used to from passage guide are there. Media and outlines we've also seen in the passage guide as well. But let's go back up to the top. And you may remember I mentioned that you can use the sermon starter guide both to place a Bible reference or to place some kind of theme in. And the sections differ depending on which of those that you do. So let's imagine that we were running a sermon starter guide this time on gifts of the Spirit. You can see that suggestion's actually made for us here. So I'll click that. It opens a new starter guide, this time to the theme. You can see that now we get different sections being listed. So we've got various suggestions for a topic guide. That's the next and final thing that I'm going to show you in just a moment. There's a passages section here of particular passages that I might want to look at if I was preaching a sermon on gifts of the Spirit. Other parts of the Bible that are also perhaps useful. And then we have a new section called Preaching Resources. Now, this is a little bit like the illustration section that maybe you've seen from the passage guide, but the tagging is much more accurate here. There's quite a small number of these themes. Again, people in Logos have done quite a lot of work in going through some useful preaching resources and tagging those resources to match these themes quite particularly. So this data here in this preaching resources section is of quite high quality. If I scroll further down, you can see there's thematic outlines again. That's exactly as we've seen before. There's a collection section again. You've seen that in other guides as media resources. So that's the Sermon Starter Guide. New feature number 19 can be used either with a topic or with a passage. And that leads us on to the final new feature in Logos 5. Again, it's on the Guides menu. Let's close these down and go back to it. And you can see it's the topic guide. Now, this is the one that many Logos users have been waiting for. If you use Logos 3, there was a topic browser in Logos 3. and now Logos 5 has the topic guide. It's a zillion times better than the topic browser, which was sometimes a little bit random. So let's use divorce as an example here. In the topic guide, you'll see immediately it has a definition section. Now this will be familiar from when you've searched your entire library, but you'll notice in Logos 5 there are a lot more dictionaries listed than there used to be in Logos 4. I've clicked that more button and you'll see all these dictionaries come up in just a moment. There you see it's quite a long list, a much longer list than maybe we've been used to in the past. So that's a nice addition. You can see that we've got related verses. So if we were again wanted to study this topic, we've got the key verses and other verses that are also useful for this topic. For the related topics section, so we can suggested that we might be interested in certificate of divorce in a topic guide. We might simply want to search our entire library for divorce and find more information. Now the other sections you've already seen in Logos 4, illustrations, resources, biblical people, but notice too we have a biblical events section now that data has been added to Bible facts. So there you have it, 20 new features in Logos 4. Actually, if I'm honest, it's way more than 20, isn't it? I've merged quite a few together to keep it simple for us. Remember, we had the modified homepage, we had the library that you were able to filter by collection and the new community tags. We had the visual filters in Bibles and in dictionaries. You remember the speaker labels and then the timeline events. We have the search helps, so you know what you're searching for. The new image tags that are down here when we're in a basic search to be able to search for specific images. Sympathetic highlighting in search results, root searching, those two extra columns in analysis view. We have the clause search. We have a documents menu with new ways to order your documents. We're able to share and undelete documents. We've got a bibliography document type. We've got the scripture memorization as part of our passage list tool. We've got the new Bible facts complete with events and the referred to as section. We've got the Bible sense lexicon that gives us relative meanings of words. We've got the timeline with more than 8,000 events added to it that we can search. We've got the new font and line spacing options. We've got that improvement to the information panel that allows us to see how words are translated in different versions of the Bible. We've got those changes to the passage guide and the exegetical guide that add in outlines to the passage guide, the sense data and the syntactic force data to the exegetical guide. We've got those wonderful new additions to the Bible word study with the senses section, the wonderful root section, the phrases section, and that ability to restrict the Bible word study to certain parts of the Bible. And we've got those two completely new guides, the sermon starter guide and the topic guide. So all in all, Logos 5 is a major update. I'm very pleased with it. And as I said at the beginning, I'm particularly pleased that I don't have to unlearn everything from Logos 4, but I can just add this new stuff that I've learned from Logos 5 to all that I know already to make Logos even more powerful and even more useful in my study of the Bible. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you're either getting into Logos 5 already or looking forward to using it soon. If you've got any questions, do remember community.logos.com, and you'll be able to ask other Logos users any questions you might have.